My parents walked into my apartment on my 29th birthday and took $2.9 million from my bank account. They didn't ask. They didn't apologize. They just dropped a folder on my kitchen table and told me my sister's future was now secure. The worst part, I watched them do it. I sat there silent while my father laughed, this satisfied, almost proud laugh, and my mother stood there with her arms crossed like she was supervising movers. "Thanks," my father said, tapping the withdrawal confirmation. "Your money secured Scarlett's future." Behind them, the single candle on my birthday cake burned itself out. They never even noticed it. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I just asked myself one question: how long until they realize what they took wasn't actually mine to lose? Let me back up. Because this didn't start on my birthday. This started when I was 17 years old and learned that in my family, I was never the priority. Growing up, our house always sounded like someone else's life was happening in it. Scarlett's piano lessons echoing down the hallway. My mother cheering from the kitchen. My father's voice booming about plans he was making for her future. Never with her. For her. I moved around all that noise like a shadow. Quiet. Careful. Trying not to interrupt the soundtrack of their expectations. Money was the first thing they took without asking. I was 17. Working part-time at a coffee shop after school, saving every dollar for college. My father came to my bedroom door one evening, jingling his car keys. "Need to borrow your savings," he said. Something important came up. He never told me what. My mother told me not to be dramatic. "Families share everything," she said. Scarlett got a new dress that week. Designer. Something she wore once to a party and never again. I figured out the math on my own. My entire summer of early mornings and burned fingers from the espresso machine, gone for a dress that ended up in the back of her closet. I remember standing in her doorway, watching her try it on. She twirled in the mirror, asking if the color suited her. I told her it looked beautiful. She never asked where it came from. She never wondered. That was when I started to understand. Scarlett wasn't cruel. She was just used to things appearing for her. And I was used to making them appear. I learned to stop mentioning when I needed things. New shoes for school. I'd wear the old ones until the soles separated. Books for class. I'd share with classmates or use the library copy. My parents never noticed. They were too busy making sure Scarlett had the newest laptop, the trendiest backpack, the right equipment for whatever hobby she'd picked up that month. At 18, I got accepted to a state university with a partial scholarship. I needed $3,000 for the remaining tuition. I asked my parents at dinner. My father put down his fork. "That's a lot of money, Nora." "I know. But I got the scholarship." "Scarlett is applying to conservatories next year," my mother interrupted. "Those auditions are expensive. We need to save." I worked 2 jobs that semester. Paid my own tuition. Took the bus 4 hours each way on weekends to work extra shifts. Scarlett got into a private music school. They threw her a party. Nobody asked how I paid for college. By the time I was 20, I'd learned to keep my victories small and my mouth shut. When I got my first certification in data security, something I'd worked nights for, my father barely glanced at the paper. "Can you fix my password problems?" he asked. My mother changed the subject to Scarlett's new internship. At dinner that night, only one story mattered. And it wasn't mine. So I worked quietly. Consistently. Every extra hour at the office. Every freelance job on weekends. Every invitation I said no to. I funneled it all into a savings account the way some people write in diaries. Numbers became my timeline. My 20s passed inside spreadsheets nobody else would ever read. I lived in a cheap studio apartment. Thin walls. Rattling heater. I had to tape the window frame every winter so the wind wouldn't whistle through. But every month I transferred what I could. $100. $300. Sometimes $1,000 when a bonus came through. I watched that balance rise slowly. Like water filling a cracked glass. Never fast. Never clean. But steady. The proud feeling I had wasn't about the money itself. It was because it was mine. Something untouched. Something no one had rewritten or redirected to Scarlett. I carried that account like secret proof that I wasn't entirely invisible. But each year, my family found new ways to remind me where I stood. Scarlett's graduation party lasted a full week. Mine ended before the cake melted. At her first job celebration, relatives gave toasts to her bright future. When I earned a promotion, my father handed me a list of bills he needed covered. "Just this month," he said. My mother smiled in that soft, pitying way. "You don't mind helping?" Everyone nodded. They all assumed generosity was my personality instead of my only choice. I paid those bills. And the next months. And the month after that. The worst moment came 6 years ago. I just finished a major project. The kind that changes careers. I'd spent 8 months developing a new security protocol that 3 different companies were already bidding on. It was the biggest professional achievement of my life. I walked into my parents' living room holding my folder, hoping for even the smallest acknowledgement. Maybe just a "well done" or a "tell us about it." They were already mid-conversation about Scarlett's newest business idea. Some boutique concept she'd been sketching out. I stood there like a guest who'd arrived at the wrong house. My father glanced up. "Nora, good. Well, you're here. Scarlett needs help with her business plan financials. You're good with numbers." That was it. That was my moment of recognition. Being volunteered to help my sister with something she'd probably abandon in 3 months. I helped her anyway. Spent 2 weeks building spreadsheets and projections. She thanked me with a Starbucks gift card. The boutique opened 6 months later. My parents threw another party. Scarlett gave a speech thanking everyone who believed in her. She didn't mention my name once. That was the day I learned my place in this family. Not the star. Not even the supporting role. Just the resource they'd forgotten could run out. Now back to my birthday. I'd actually made plans that day. A friend from work had invited me out for dinner. I was going to say yes. I was going to celebrate myself for once. Then my parents showed up. My father pushed that folder across my kitchen table like he was delivering paperwork I'd already agreed to. The edges were worn. Someone had handled it many times before bringing it to me. I opened it because staying still was the only thing I trusted myself to do. The first page was a withdrawal confirmation. The number at the bottom didn't make sense at first. My brain refused to attach meaning to something so clean. So absolute. $2,900,000. 10 years of extra hours. Skipped holidays. Saved bonuses. Paychecks divided into careful portions. All gone in a single signature. My father let out that short laugh. "Your money secured your sister's future," he said again. The room went quiet enough that I could hear the fridge humming. My mother adjusted her blouse. "You would have wasted it anyway." Not cruel. Not angry. Just certain. What would I have wasted it on? I asked quietly. She looked at me like I'd asked something ridiculous. "You don't have plans. You don't have ambitions like Scarlett. You just work." "I work because I'm paying your bills." My father waved his hand dismissively. "We would have managed." "No," I said. "You wouldn't have. You haven't managed anything in 20 years. The temperature in the room dropped. "Don't speak to your father that way," my mother snapped. Something inside me stopped. Not a feeling. Not a thought. But a movement. A pause. The kind that happens when you finally see the truth without its excuses. Scarlett wasn't there, but I could hear her name in every word they said. Her future. Her needs. Her world. Mine wasn't mentioned. Not once. They kept talking. Plans. Timelines. A renovation Scarlett wanted for her business. A thank you dinner they assumed I'd attend. "We're thinking next Saturday," my mother said. "Scarlett wants to thank you properly." "I'm not coming," I said. My father frowned. "Don't be difficult." "I'm not being difficult. I'm being done." "What's that supposed to mean?" I stood up. "It means you can leave now." My mother's eyes went wide. "Nora, get out of my apartment." They stared at me like I'd grown a second head. I'd never spoken to them like this. Never set a boundary. Never said no. My father stood slowly. "You're upset. We'll talk when you've calmed down." "No," I said. "We won't." They left. But not before my mother turned at the door and said, "Scarlett is going to be so hurt by your attitude." I closed the door behind them and stood there in the silence. Then I did the one thing they never expected. I laughed. Not loudly. Not mockingly. Just a quiet exhale shaped into a sound they would have mistaken for surrender. But it wasn't surrender. It was the moment I stopped pretending they were ever going to see me. Here's what they didn't know. What they took wasn't my real savings. The folder they dropped on my table held numbers they believed belonged to me. And technically, they had. For a while. Long enough for them to trust the balance. Long enough for confidence to make them careless. They thought they understood everything about how I lived. Practical. Quiet. Predictable. They never understood the way I prepared. 3 years earlier, on a late night in my office, I created a parallel structure. A decoy account. It mirrored my real savings exactly. Only deposits at consistent intervals. Amounts reasonable enough to pass as authentic. Transfers in a cadence identical to the way I'd built my life. But its purpose was never to be spent. It existed to be touched by the wrong hands. See, I work in data security. I help design fraud detection algorithms for financial institutions. I know exactly what triggers a system-wide alert. I know what patterns look like when money moves suspiciously. And I built that decoy account to be suspiciously clean. No personal bills. No payments that would tie it to my daily life. Just deposits. Perfectly timed. Perfectly mirrored. The kind of account that looks exactly like someone laundering money. The idea came to me after another family dinner. Scarlett had just announced she was closing her boutique, the one I'd helped plan, the one my parents had initially funded with $20,000 they'd asked me to loan them. She was bored with it, she said. Wanted to try something else. My father nodded along like this was perfectly reasonable. My mother asked what her next venture might be. I sat there calculating. $20,000. Gone. Not even a lesson learned. That night, I started building the decoy. Every deposit I made to my real account, I mirrored with a slightly smaller one to the decoy. Not exact, that would have been suspicious. But close enough that anyone looking at it would think it was my primary savings. I spent weeks testing the fraud detection parameters. Running scenarios. Making sure that a large, sudden withdrawal would trigger every possible red flag. I even left small breadcrumbs. Transfers that came from accounts with generic names. Deposits that happened at odd times. Patterns that looked almost too perfect. Then I waited. I didn't know when they'd come for it. But I knew they would. Eventually, Scarlett would need something big. And eventually, they'd remember I had money somewhere. I gave them access to the decoy account 18 months ago. Told them it was for emergencies only. My father had asked for the login information, said it would give them peace of mind to know I was financially stable. I gave it to them. Watched them write it down. Watched them file it away. They'd checked the balance a few times. I could see the login history. They never took anything then. Just looked. Waiting for the right moment. I just had to make sure they found the right account. The morning after my birthday, my apartment was silent again. That folder sat exactly where my father had pushed it. I made coffee. Watched the steam rise. Set the mug beside my laptop. I opened my logs. Every transfer ever made to the decoy account was organized in a spreadsheet. Timestamps. Notations. A color-coded column for expected behavior. I had mapped the exact moment when a suspicious withdrawal would trigger a fraud alert from the system I'd helped design years before. The flags were already active. The moment they accessed that money, the algorithm started its quiet work. The real savings. Untouched. Living somewhere else entirely. $3.4 million across 5 different accounts, all properly structured, all legitimately mine. I sent a single text to my lawyer. They accessed the flagged account. A moment later, proceed. No explanation. No lecture. No outrage. We'd rehearsed this exact line months ago. My lawyer, Victoria, had asked me once if I was sure about this. They're your parents, she'd said. They stopped being my parents when I became their ATM, I'd replied. She didn't argue after that. Just helped me document everything. Every instance they'd taken money. Every bill I'd paid. Every time they prioritized Scarlett over me. This is the most thorough documentation I've ever seen, she told me. If this goes to court, you'll have everything you need. It won't go to court, I'd said. They'll never know what hit them. I closed the messages and opened another folder on my computer. Inside were statements, payments, transfers, copies of emails, snapshots of balances from the last decade. Everything I'd ever put away for myself was detailed in clean rows. I added the newest screenshot, the decoy account balance at 0. Then I did something simpler than I'd imagined. I opened my banking app and removed my parents from every auto payment they'd asked me to temporarily cover over the years. Insurance. Utilities. A monthly contribution they insisted was for family emergencies. I'd been paying my father's car insurance for 4 years. Just until we get back on our feet, he'd said. They'd taken 2 vacations to Europe in that time. My mother's health insurance. 3 years. Their mortgage payment. Twice, when my father had cash flow issues. Added up, and I'd given them over $60,000 in the past 5 years alone. Money they never mentioned. Never acknowledged. Never paid back. One by one, I canceled the scheduled payments. Each cancellation made a soft clicking sound. It was the quietest boundary I'd ever drawn. Then I did something else. I changed my phone number. Updated my address with work to a P.O. box. Removed my parents from every emergency contact list. I was erasing myself from their easy reach. If they wanted to find me now, they'd have to work for it. The first alert came while I was pouring my morning coffee. A soft vibration on the counter. The screen lighting up. Unusual activity detected. Then my phone rang. My father's number. His voice exploded the moment I answered. What did you do, Nora? The bank froze everything. Every account. They're saying there's an investigation. I leaned against the counter, watching sunlight crawl across the floor. I got an alert too, I said quietly. Seems like a fraud check. Don't play games with me, he barked. They think we laundered money. They're reviewing transfers. They're asking questions about patterns. Patterns. The exact thing I'd built the trap around. My mother's voice bled through the speaker. High and frantic. Fix this, Nora. You're ruining our reputation. Scarlett is in tears. Your father can't breathe. I raised the cup to my lips. You mean the future my money supposedly secured? The silence that followed felt like a door finally closing. You knew, my father said slowly. You set this up. I protected myself, I corrected. There's a difference. You vindictive little. I ended the call. I opened my email. Another alert, this one from a federal compliance office. Account flagged. Under review. Not mine. Theirs. Then another update from my lawyer. They triggered the full audit. Stand by. The beautiful thing about fraud detection systems? Once they start investigating, they look at everything. Every account. Every transfer. Every inconsistency. My parents had been sloppy with their finances for years. Unreported income. Cash deposits that didn't match their tax returns. Loans from friends that were never documented properly. The decoy account was just the thread. Once pulled, the whole thing would unravel. By midday, my parents had called 8 times. Scarlett twice. I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I went to work, sat at my desk, reviewed a contract draft. My hands were steady. My heartbeat was calm. A coworker, Ethan, stopped by around lunch. You okay? You seem different. I'm good, I said. Really good, actually. He looked at me for a moment, then nodded and walked away. That evening, the news ran a short segment. Local couple under investigation for suspected financial misconduct. The camera caught my parents outside their home. My father arguing with someone off frame. My mother shielding her face from the reporter's questions. Their expressions were a mirror image of the arrogance they'd worn in my apartment. Only now the confidence was gone. I watched the screen in silence. The reporter mentioned suspicious transfers and pattern inconsistencies. Everything I'd engineered into that account. My phone buzzed. A text from Scarlett. What's happening? Mom and Dad won't tell me anything. Please call me. I stared at the message. Part of me wanted to ignore it. But another part, the part that remembered helping her with homework, braiding her hair before school, that part couldn't. I called her back. Nora. Her voice cracked. What's going on? They took money from me, Scarlett. Money I spent 10 years saving. They didn't ask. They just took it. I didn't know, she whispered. I swear I didn't know where it came from. I know you didn't. What's going to happen to them? I closed my eyes. That depends on what the investigation finds. Can you stop it? Can you fix it? And there it was. The same question they'd all been asking my whole life. Can you fix it, Nora? Can you help, Nora? Can you just handle this, Nora? No, I said. I can't. Please, Nora. They're my parents too. Then maybe you should have wondered where all that money came from. The boutique funding. The renovations. Your apartment deposit. Did you think it all just appeared? She was quiet for a long moment. I thought they had it, she finally said. They didn't. I did. And they took it without asking. I'll pay you back. It's not about the money anymore, Scarlett. It's about them thinking they could just take whatever they wanted from me and I'd smile and say thank you. I hung up. The next morning brought escalation. A hard knock rattled my apartment door. Urgent. Uneven. I opened it to find my mother standing there. Hair unbrushed. Perfume mixed with panic. She pushed past me before I said a word. Nora, listen to me, she said, pacing like a trapped animal. Investigators came to the house. They asked about wire transfers. Missing statements. Your father almost passed out. This can't be happening. Not to us. I leaned against the counter. The same place I'd stood when they told me they'd taken everything. I told you not to touch what wasn't yours. She froze. We're your parents. Everything we did was for the family. For Scarlett, I corrected. Her eyes glistened, but tears didn't soften her tone. You set us up. No, I said. You walked into a system you didn't understand. And you assumed I wouldn't understand it either. Her shoulders sagged. Please help us. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to negotiate. She looked at me then, really looked at me, maybe for the first time in years. When did you become so cold? She asked. When I realized warm didn't matter, I said. I could have been on fire and you wouldn't have noticed. Not if Scarlett needed a glass of water. She flinched. Get out, I said quietly. We gave you everything. You gave me nothing. The words came out louder than I intended. You gave Scarlett everything. I earned everything I have. Every single dollar. Every opportunity. Every achievement. I did that. Not you. We raised you. You kept me alive. That's not the same thing as raising me. She stood there, mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. I paid your bills for 5 years, I continued. I helped Scarlett with every single business plan. I showed up to every family dinner where you talked about everyone but me. I played the role you wanted. And you still took from me like I was just a bank with no feelings. We thought you wouldn't mind, she whispered. You thought I wouldn't matter, I corrected. There's a difference. She left without another word. The following day, the full turn happened. Emails. Letters. A formal notice confirming the audit. Then the message from my lawyer that settled everything. They accessed the flagged account. The investigation is proceeding exactly as expected. They've also discovered additional irregularities in their other accounts. This is bigger than we thought. I stepped onto my balcony, letting the warm air wash over my face. Below, the city hummed with its usual indifference. Behind me, the TV replayed the news segment. My parents' voices echoed faintly through the glass. They hadn't just stolen from me. They'd walked straight into a trap I'd set for them years ago. And all I had done was stop saving them from themselves. The rain started that evening. Soft against the balcony railings. I stepped outside with a mug warming my hands. The city blurred behind the mist. The air smelled like wet concrete. Inside, my phone buzzed with updates. Articles. Messages. Inquiries. I let them sit. On the table beside me lay an old photograph my father had mailed months earlier. The 3 of us at a beach. Sunlight hitting our faces unevenly. My younger self perched on his shoulders. I lifted it, tracing the edge where the paper had softened over time. It felt like holding a story that no longer belonged to me. Work had been steady that week. I'd signed 2 new contracts. Answered questions in meetings where my opinions actually mattered. Walked through hallways without feeling like a placeholder. Ethan had asked if I wanted to grab coffee. Not as colleagues. As friends. I'd said yes. Small things. But they felt huge. A letter waited in my mailbox. Scarlett's handwriting. Uneven and unfamiliar. She wrote that she'd enrolled in a program for women rebuilding their finances. That she understood if I didn't want to reply. There was no accusation. Only a quiet acknowledgement of everything she hadn't seen until now. I thought money just appeared, she wrote. I never asked where it came from. I never wondered who went without so I could have more. I'm sorry, Nora. I'm so sorry. I set her letter beside the old photograph and watched the rain streak down the glass. I wasn't ready to forgive her yet. Maybe I never would be. But I appreciated the honesty. Later, I drove to the coast. The same stretch of sand from that old photo. The same tide pulling in and out. I stood where the waves could reach my feet and felt the water wrap briefly around my ankles before letting go. I forgive you, I whispered into the wind. Not for them. For me. Some boundaries aren't spoken. They're drawn the moment you stop returning to the places that taught you to shrink. My family once believed I would carry their mistakes forever. That silence meant obedience instead of understanding. But the truth was simple. I didn't break the cycle. I just stepped out of it. The ocean behind me moved in quiet rhythms. Steady. Unbothered. I took one last breath of salt air and walked back toward my car, leaving the past where it finally belonged. My phone rang as I reached the parking lot. An unknown number. I almost didn't answer. But something made me pick up. Is this Nora? Yes. This is Detective Hayes. I'm working on your parents' case. I wanted to let you know, we've completed the initial review. There are some significant irregularities. We'll need to ask you some questions, but as a witness, not a suspect. You're in the clear. Thank you for letting me know. One more thing, he said. I've been doing this 20 years. I've seen a lot of financial crimes. This is the first time I've seen someone protect themselves this thoroughly. Smart work. I smiled. Thank you, Detective. Can I ask you something off the record? Sure. Did you know they'd take it? I watched the waves crash against the shore. I knew eventually they'd try, I said. I just made sure when they did, they'd face consequences for once. He was quiet for a moment. Well, they're facing them now. The DA is considering charges. Wire fraud. Financial exploitation. Possibly more. What happens next? That depends on them. If they cooperate, might just be fines and restitution. If they fight it. He trailed off. Let's just say the evidence is pretty damning. After I hung up, I sat in my car for a while, watching the sun sink lower on the horizon. Part of me felt guilty. They were still my parents, after all. But a bigger part of me felt free. For 29 years, I'd carried their weight. Their bills. Their expectations. Their belief that I existed to serve Scarlett's dreams. Now I was done carrying anything but my own life. 3 weeks later, I got another letter from Scarlett. She'd gotten a job. Nothing glamorous, administrative work at a nonprofit. But it was steady. She was learning to budget. Learning to save. I never knew how hard it was, she wrote. How much you sacrificed. I'm trying to understand now. I'm trying to be better. I wrote back this time. A short note. Nothing warm, but not cold either. I'm glad you're learning. Keep going. That was all I could offer. Maybe someday there'd be more. But not yet. My parents didn't reach out. I heard through Scarlett that they'd taken a plea deal. Probation. Restitution. Community service. They'd have to pay back the money they took, or tried to. The decoy account funds had been returned to me once the investigation confirmed I was the victim, not the perpetrator. I donated it all. Every cent. To scholarships for kids working their way through college. To programs helping people escape financial abuse from family members. The money they'd stolen to secure Scarlett's future instead secured futures for people who actually needed help. It felt right. 6 months after my birthday, I stood in my new apartment. Bigger windows. Better heating. A neighborhood where I could walk at night without worry. I'd bought it outright. No mortgage. No debt. The closing agent had looked at me funny when I'd handed over the cashier's check. Not many people your age can do this, she'd said. I've been saving for a long time, I'd replied. That night, I cooked dinner for myself. Real dinner, not microwaved leftovers. I opened a bottle of wine, sat on my balcony and watched the city lights flicker on. My phone buzzed. Ethan. Still on for coffee tomorrow? I smiled and typed back. Absolutely. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for someone else's permission to be happy. I wasn't working extra hours to cover someone else's mistakes. I wasn't shrinking myself to fit into spaces that were never meant for me. I was just living. And it felt like breathing after being underwater for 29 years. Thanks for listening, and if you like this story, give it a thumbs up. Don't forget to comment and subscribe for more stories about standing up for yourself when the people who should protect you become the ones you need protection from. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be their safety net anymore.